So just want to say to everybody, welcome. Welcome everyone to the third of our Elevating Women in Leadership taster sessions, and thank you for joining us. You may have noticed that the session is being recorded today. We know that there's some people that couldn't make it today, so the session will be recorded and everybody will receive the recording of the session. So just to introduce myself, if you haven't been to either of the previous sessions, my name is Sarah Sweeney, and I'm the lead for the Elevating Women in Leadership programme for Ireland. And I'm also joined by Pauline Muldoon. And Pauline, if you'd like to introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Sarah. So my name's Pauline Muldoon. I'm an executive coach credentialed with the ICF, and I'm a Elevating Women in Leadership coach and facilitator. I am Irish, but based in the UK, in case the accent sounds familiar. And yeah, very happy to spend the time with you today.
Okay, fantastic. So one of the things that we are often asked is why have development programs for women? And from our research and data, we know that women face headwinds and challenges that make it more difficult to progress to senior level. So our Women in Leadership program is based on those specific areas relevant for women to enable them to thrive. So let me just give you a quick recap of these sessions in case this is your first session. So we've been offering 4 taster sessions. So the first one we ran on career activism on the 7th of June. And the second one was last Wednesday, strengthening and resilience. Today we're focusing on leading with impact and brand. And next week we will be focusing on adding strategic value. So I hope you'll be able to join us next week too. So we're going to go through how we deliver our eWill programs and give you as much insight and development as we can in the next 15 minutes or so. So for those of you thinking about your own development, we've created a worksheet for you to reflect on at the session, which has been sent out and will be posted in the chat. For those for your own development, we recommend you find a buddy to talk through what comes up for you in these sessions. We do this on our programs and we facilitate this for you to have conversations about your insights and learning. So we do recommend this. And we also want to let you know that today's session is in webinar format. And so for the real program, it's fully interactive. And so today we won't have whiteboards and breakouts, but we will be using chat and polls. And if you have any questions, please ask any questions and put them into the Q&A as we go through. So using the Q&A button, and we're aiming to keep about 10 minutes at the end for Q&A. So let's just frame where we are in the program now. So this is the program here, and today we're focusing on presence and impact workshop. So on the program following the Strengthening Confidence and Resilience workshop, which we spoke about last week, you would have gone into a discovery session, which is a smaller group session. So we split up the larger group into smaller groups of 8 to 10 people, where you talk about anything you have put into practice from the previous workshop and any challenges that you might have had. I appreciate that this is not the real session, but if you were with us last week, I'd like to invite you to put into chat if there was anything that stuck with you from last week, anything that resonated with you or sparked any conversations during the week, or if there was anything you tried out and put into practice. We'd love to hear it. If you want to just pop it in chat. As mentioned, we're doing the Leading Presence and Impact workshop today. So we start off by focusing on authenticity and exploring how to bring your best self to your leadership role, building your personal brand and increasing your visibility, and then promoting yourself within the business. On the first session, we shared that women who are successful in accelerating their careers advocate on their own behalf. So ways to share their achievements and accomplishments and make themselves more visible as they network with important stakeholders. This all comes into our impact and brand session. So by the end of this session, you will have really thought what you want to communicate about yourself, how to do this in a way that feels right for you, and how to increase visibility of your achievements. So first part of the workshop is always welcome back. And then as we do go into talking about presence and impact at this point of the program, we would normally do a breathing exercise to help us focus, just to take a minute. And then we go into authenticity. So my colleague Pauline is going to run through authenticity with us.
Thank you, Sarah. I'm just going to share my screen. Can you see my screen? Sarah, yep.
Yes. Let me just check. Yes.
You can, Anastasia, perfect. Brilliant. So as Sarah said, in this session, we start by really focus on authenticity. And authenticity really is about how to bring your best self to your leadership role. It's about building your personal brand, increasing your visibility, and also promoting yourself within the business. So Sarah mentioned women who are successful, they do advocate for themselves. And they don't do it in an uncomfortable way. They find ways to share their achievements. They make themselves more visible. And all of this really does come into our impact and brand. So Sarah also mentioned by the end of the session, you'll have really thought through how you want to communicate about yourself in a way that feels right for you and increase your visibility in a way that's comfortable. So I'm interested to know, and pop in chat if you're comfortable, what does authenticity mean to you? So Brené Brown studies human connection, and she talks about our ability to empathize, to belong, to love. Her TED Talk is one of the top 4 most watched TED Talks. It's called The Power of Vulnerability, and I really recommend you watch it. So I don't know if we've any in chat yet, Sarah, about authenticity.
Yes, there is one person here that says how I want to show up.
Yeah, love that. And it's how I want to show up in a way that's comfortable for me. So yeah, being authentic, so it's an alignment between your internal values and beliefs and your external behavior. And it comes from really finding your style and your way of leading and being comfortable in that. So making decisions that really reflect your values and your personality. So saying, you know, be yourself is really oversimplifying authenticity. So especially in a workplace context, when we play different roles and we have different stakeholder groups. So for me, the idea is about being yourself with purpose, with intention. If you think about, let's say you want to paint your living room and you want to paint your living room purple, but you go and look and there's so many shades of purple. So in terms of bringing your authentic self to work, let's say purple is your authentic self. It is about your core values. How much purple you're bringing into every interaction can change by that situation. It depends on the audience. Sometimes it needs to be very bold. Sometimes it needs to be softer. For me, being authentic really is being true to myself and my values. And I have many different stakeholder groups. I'm a coach. I work with coachees. I do team facilitation. They require different shades of purple, and also working with my stakeholder groups internally. Again, a different shade of purple. So we're going to do a poll now. Anastasia, can you launch the poll? I'm interested to know if you think there's any headwinds for women in being authentic at work. So we're seeing some unsure, absolutely. I think one of the things that our program does, it makes us be much more aware of the headwinds that we face, and also makes us be much more purposeful in how we're dealing with them. So the reality is leadership transition can be challenging for women because we have to establish credibility in a culture that sometimes can equate leadership with behaviors that we see in a more masculine way. And also, especially if powerful female role models are scarce. When women lead in a different way, for example, compassionate leadership, collaboratively, instead of, you know, really boldly asserting the new direction, their contribution can be less recognized. So I'm going to share the results of the poll. 42% say yes, absolutely. Often there are headwinds. 42% say sometimes, and 17% say I'm unsure. What's really interesting is nobody says no, absolutely, there's no headwinds. So in the program, we talk to women about the headwinds they face. And sometimes we hear that, you know, we feel pressure to fulfill a certain role or adopt a certain persona to gain respect. And also sometimes there is a real bias toward, assertive, take charge qualities, and they're being valued as leadership compared to being collaborative or having high empathy. And then similarly, and in reverse, some women whose authentic style is really strong, assertive, we can feel judged because we don't fulfill the stereotype of, high collaboration, being a very caring leader. So sometimes we can feel that compassion, empathy, they're less recognized or valued. I know I saw some research recently that there's an expectation for women to be more collaborative. And in reality, that's another headwind, isn't it? Because if that's not our direct style, if it's not true to us, then we're facing that. So role models, if I think of Jacinta Ardern, who was New Zealand Prime Minister, so she really led with compassion through her time, and she handled the COVID pandemic. Yes, it was controversial, but generally she had the support of the people in how she did that. So there's a recent McKinsey Women in the Workplace report showing that women really have risen to the moment during the pandemic. So we've been seen as strong leaders doing more than men to help teams navigate challenges and also to support individual well-being, which was really needed during the pandemic. But actually this work largely goes unrecognized. So the more we value a range of leadership behaviors and a range of role models as women leaders, and the more that we're true to who we are, the more we can diminish those headwinds. So questions that are regularly asked, as I said, is a leader who is seen as very strong? Is it assertive if they're a man and bossy if they're a woman? Also, women who are terribly compassionate and collaborative, do we really feel that we're not as recognized for that? And also when we speak powerfully and we really articulate views and take a strong view, are we perceived as less likable? And these are all headwinds that we're facing. What's really helpful, and I encourage anyone I coach or anyone in these programs, is to look at different role models. So senior leaders, look at how they show up and see actually what resonates with you and what is more comfortable for you.
And Pauline, just to mention this in the chat there, which is very interesting, just a comment that I think that it is definitely true, reassertive versus bossy. Even in children, we rarely call boys bossy, which is true, isn't it? I actually have a boy myself, and I don't think I've ever called him bossy. Interesting. Yeah.
Is interesting. And the challenge that we talk a lot in this program is, girls, I think less so, actually. I think modern parenting is slightly different, but girls traditionally were encouraged to, socialize and to care, and to be much more aware of everyone else. I know that, for example, we've seen a massive rise in, female leaders in the 30s and 40s being diagnosed with ADHD. And one of the reasons that this is happening now is that girls are socialized to be more collaborative, and also they're socialized to mask, what we can pick up very easily in boys with ADHD, because they watch people around them and they respond much more to what's needed from them in the social setting. So then moving on from that, it's good for us to consider self-talk and how we're talking to ourselves and the impact that's having. So think back to the last session that Sarah did on mindset and beliefs. And it's good to consider for you if there's any unhelpful self-talk or thinking patterns that are maybe tripping you up in being authentic, and consider what needs to stop, what needs to start, and what needs to continue. It's a really good opportunity to reflect on what's the best version of you at work. The reality is there's no one way to be a leader. We have to just be the best version of who we are. I spoke to a senior female leader a few weeks ago, and one of the comments she made was, as women leaders, we have to be who we are, not who we were. So I think that means shaking off previous expectations and trying to shake off the negative self-talk that we've started to listen to. So in facing the headwinds, it's really important for us to feel confident to lead in a way that's true to us, and also to be comfortable in ensuring that our successes are seen by others. So therefore, it's really important in this program that we look at personal brand, self-advocacy, which again, it's something that little girls are socialized to not do. Whereas, you know, in the past, little boys were socialized to be a lot more forthright about their achievements, and also the impact we have. And all of these contribute to our impact. So this is all in your worksheet for you to reflect on. I can't see the chat, but I'm interested to know, you know, what's the self-talk that potentially is holding us back. I know when I work with female leaders, I really encourage them to drop any I should or I need to, and really focus much more on being kind of proactive and also being kind to ourselves. So I can choose to do that, or I can choose not to do that, rather than I should or I have to. So being comfortable in making my work visible, really seeing the value we add and being proud of it, being clear that we have so much to offer and people can trust in us and bank on us, being aware of our strengths, and also really realizing that I am enough and I can do, you know, what is needed. So when we talk about developing self-awareness, again, this fits into bringing our authentic selves to work and how we communicate that to others. So there's three things that come into self-awareness, and they are: one, how I see myself; two, how others see me; three, how I want to be seen. So if we look at how I see myself, so for self-awareness, on our leadership programs, we complete Strength Scope, and this would have been looked at in the last session. And Strength Scope is really powerful because it focuses on our strengths, some that we may not have been aware of, some that we may have been aware of, but maybe not given as much store to. You know, as human beings, we do have a negativity bias. There's a statistic that says, you know, for one negative comment we hear in work, we have to hear 5 positive to outweigh that. And interestingly, in our personal lives, for one negative comment we hear, we have to hear 7 positive to outweigh that. So Strength Scope really does encourage people to think about their strengths. So consider how I want to be seen. So this is really about our personal brand. I think in the last session, Sarah, I'm not sure if you covered this in the last session, but if we haven't done, for example, a Strength Scope 360, we ask people to do a 5 words activity. And what that is ask 5 people the 5 words that they would use to describe you. It gives you a really clear sense of how you are seen. So some you may be very happy with, some you may have a chance to change. I know a colleague of mine previously did a 5-word exercise, and the feedback she got was that she was seen as very helpful and got the job done. And really, she wanted to be seen as more capable and strategic rather than just running with a piece of work and doing it. So she very much focused on understanding the bigger picture, asking more questions when someone passed her some work, and that really impacted how she was seen. For me, I know that I worked with an organization, and they were giving me feedback, and one of the bits of feedback they shared was that I was very commanding. So in theory, that's good, but actually I wanted to be more of a thought partner to them. So I really made the effort to understand where they are and get a lot deeper on how they were feeling before coming in with my solutions. So we spend time in breakout rooms on the program. This is all in your worksheet for you to consider. And the reality is, your personal brand is what people say about you when you're not in the room. So it's really good to think about how you want your personal brand to be. You know, think about, for example, 3 unique selling points that you have as your USPs, and talk to someone about it, maybe your buddy partner from this program. So at this stage, we would take a break. So this is maybe 60 to 70 minutes into the program. We'll break, we'll move around, we'll do an energizer, and then we'll come back together for the next part. So Sarah, I'm going to pass to you now.
Thanks, Pauline. I'm just going to get my screen ready. For a moment.
You want me to share?
No, it's okay. It's actually coming up for me now. Can you see my screen, Pauline?
Yeah, absolutely. I've just looked at the
Perfect. Give me
chat while
1 second.
Sarah moves forward with that. Someone couldn't see my screen, but now all good. That is great, Melanie. Lovely to hear. And someone said about how I want to show up. Absolutely. Let's be purposeful and think about how we're walking into a room or how we're engaging with people. And also some people agreeing assertive v bossy. Yeah, it's a shame. It's interesting. I have a boy and a girl. My daughter is very assertive, and I guess because I work in this field, I am so careful to not call her bossy or pushy. Okay, Sarah, I'm handing to you.
Great. Okay, fantastic. Thank you. So as Pauline mentioned about personal brand, we really do reflect on this quote by Chris Ducker, which is personal brand is actually what's being said about you when you're not in the room. So on our program, this realization can actually be quite a moment for people. People begin to think, kind of stop and reflect and think, well, am I managing that? And is what's being said about me what I want to be said? So really the important part here in relation to this is to think about not letting it take on life of its own and taking control of this and making sure that this has the influence in your network that you wanted to actually have. So let's move on to consider what you communicate about yourself and your personal brand. So as I mentioned there, do you want it to take on life of its own? Probably not. Do you want to take control of the narrative? Absolutely. So by managing your message and how the world sees you, you'll be better positioned to achieve your goals. And as Pauline did mention already, we did have a colleague who wasn't that happy with most of the, we did have a colleague who was asked 5 words that best described them a little while ago. And they were happy with most of it, except for 1 word that actually came back. And the part they weren't happy with was actually a word called low maintenance. And as Pauline had mentioned, they were seen as someone who was helpful and got the job done well, but didn't really need much more than that. They were very career driven, and it's just people weren't able to see that through their behaviours. So what they did was they worked on challenging it. And whenever they were given work, they asked more questions about how this linked to the bigger picture. They thought about how they could achieve more than was expected and how they could increase the visibility of what they were working on and the results. And that changed their reputation really from low maintenance to strategic, which is what we wanted. So here are some examples of some powerful brands. So you're going to recognize all of these people. So as Pauline mentioned there, Jacinda Ardern, the world's youngest female prime minister. And she was really seen as someone who was really strong, and she led with compassion and empathy. And that's really what her brand was all about. And she really stood out as someone who was in the position that she was in, but she was compassionate and empathetic, which aren't words often associated with politicians. Greta Thunberg as a disruptor who described her Asperger's as a superpower. There's also Ellen DeGeneres, and her brand has taken a bit of a, has gone down a little bit in the sense that she used to be seen as a sunny philanthropist, but she did suffer with stories of being mean and creating a toxic work environment. So she reportedly wanted to shut down the show, her Ellen show, and to recover actually her personal brand, and she issued an apology. Michelle Obama, she's used her openness and transparency to demonstrate authenticity and reliability. So she's very much relatable. And Oprah, pioneer of television confessions, so created connections through sharing her own vulnerabilities and struggles. Sheryl Sandberg, CEO of Facebook and founder of Lean In. She has a TED Talk on why we have too few women leaders. Serena Williams returned to top-level tennis after going on maternity leave. And Meghan Markle, who is probably struggling a little bit with some aspects of her brand at the moment. But whatever you think about their brand, they have one and they do manage it. Personal brand isn't just for celebrities. If you're looking to progress your career, get recognition or influence more, it's essential in building your reputation. So what makes a powerful brand? Well, a strong personal brand is one that has a high level of impact, which then leads to influence amongst the people you interact with. It's made up of different elements, but at the heart, it's about showing up authentically and being yourself. So what we do in the program is we take the time to define your goals and purpose and what you want to communicate to others. And we do this by using this tool, which is a brand pyramid. So what we do is we start with using or looking at your core values that you identified from the pre-work and the behaviors and beliefs that guide you. And then next we focus on your strengths from the strength scope assessments, your skills and experience, what energizes and excites you. We look at what you're good at. From that, the value you want to add to your organization. And then ultimately, what is the best of what you bring and what drives you. So here's an example. So for this particular person, their values, their strengths and achievements, and then how they want to add value to the organization by creating environments in which teams thrive and bringing out the best in everyone. So ultimately what drives this person is building peak performance teams. And the brand pyramid is just really a way of bringing several bits of thinking together in one place. And it's a really personal thing. So it's quite personal to you and something you'll need to work on yourself. It is in your worksheet. So after this session, if you'd like to work on that, it may be useful as well to find a buddy or find someone to test it out on. So in the program itself, we spend time reflecting on your brand pyramid. And we also put you into partners to share your personal brand thinking. So I'm going to pass you over now to Pauline, who's going to share with us the next part of the program, which is presence and impact. Pauline, can you hear me?
Sorry,
Pauline, can you hear me?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, sorry, no worries at all. I'll stop sharing, okay?
No, I pushed you out anyway.
Oh, did you? No worries at all.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
So,
thanks, Pauline.
We then focus on presence and impact, which really is like the outward, manifestation of our brand. So how do we build leadership presence? So we build them in every interaction we have. So create impactful moments and experiences to gain and sustain credibility, influence, and trust. So I'm interested to know from any of you, what helps you communicate with impact? So put in the chat if you're comfortable. I know that for me, actually, what made a big difference, and I'm not saying everyone should do this training, but when I trained as a coach, it gave me a freedom to not always need to know the answer. So I think that when I enter into any interaction with someone, I'm really interested to know where they're coming from, what's success to them, what's important to them. And I think that's made a big, big difference in how I interact with people. So Mary says preparation, knowing her topic. Yeah, absolutely. Especially if it's in a high stakes interaction. And Orla says starting a meeting with an intro into the 3 things we want to achieve. Yeah, I love that. There's nothing more soul destroying than a meeting with no focus. And Zoe says fully understand what I'm trying to communicate. Absolutely. Communication is such a big thing. So, once we've thought about what we want to say, so you talked about the preparation for a meeting, it's really important to think about how you want to say it and the impact you want to have, which is what creates our leadership presence. So how can we quickly build credibility? How can we build influence? How can we build trust? So there are a number of factors. Oh gosh, sorry. One is thinking about it. So what we're actually processing, what our intention is. 2, how we interact with someone. So how they experience us. And then 3, what we're revealing. So what people see in that interaction. And what that does is creates a perception. And ideally that perception is confidence, leadership, and presence. So the factors that shape perceptions of impact. 1, what we're thinking about. So it's a cognitive process. It's what's happening in our head. So, what's our brand? What's our goal? How prepared are we? Also, bigger picture, our vision, the ideas, also our wisdom and judgment. So when this is done well, we can really come across as strategic, intentional, just generally quite together. So being intentional, to be intentional, it's important to have a really clearly defined personal brand. So for you, who are you? What do you stand for? It's also important to really be deliberate about your goals. And even if that's in a single interaction or a larger business setting, and also being quite clear on your career goals. So they were covered in career activism. And it's really important that we don't, decide on our goals and put them away in a drawer, that we continually revisit and make sure that we're on the path and we're living them. And then finally, being prepared mentally and emotionally for the interactions. There's a lot of talk about mindfulness now, and some people do it well, some people don't do it well. But I think for any of us, being emotionally strong or together, not necessarily strong, being emotionally together before we go into any interaction is really important. So how we interact is really what people experience when they're talking to us, in a meeting with us, seeing us on a screen, etc. When it's done well, we really can sound and feel like a leader. And, one thing to think about is, can you leverage your voice for effect? So, what's your tone? What's your volume? And also, what's the pace? And consider if you flex your language for the audience. I mentioned about, looking at some leaders whose presence you admire or, are aligned to you. And you'll notice that leaders with presence, they're not seen as ramblers. They communicate in short, concise sound bites, and they leverage stories to illustrate points. I worked with a really charismatic CEO a number of years ago. And, one of my biggest observations was he was such a great storyteller. So he really got past a business focus and got to the emotion and the heart, the feels of people he was talking to. It's also about being able to communicate, with appropriate assertiveness and decisiveness. So I mentioned that, one of the feedback things I got was being commanding. I mean, on reflection, I was potentially being a bit too assertive in those interactions. So I dialed that down and really was a thinking partner. And it's about others perceiving that you take a stand, that you have an opinion, and, you feel strongly about something when it's needed. But as well as that, you're fair and inclusive, and you're also approachable and empathetic to others. Now, I know that seems like a whole long list of everything that we have to do, but I encourage you to think about, what's authentic to you and what is you that you want people to experience. So I mentioned about using your voice to its fullest. So we know that, how we say something has more power than actually what we say. And if we learn to use our voices to the full extent, and I'll acknowledge that not that many of us do that, and I'm not saying I do, but professional performers absolutely have undergone so much training for this. But I encourage you to be purposeful about your voice. So it's how you tell a story, how you emphasize your points. It's about sounding confident and warm. So speaking faster can increase the energy. Using dramatic pauses can really grab attention. So, use all of those things that we have at our fingertips. So with volume, traditionally, it's viewed that women have, maybe softer voices. I wouldn't say quieter, but softer voices. So I encourage you, it's an opportunity for you to speak up louder, take more space with your voice. So vary the volume for effect. Tone is also really important. So having gravitas and presence, it's knowing when to be energetic and also when to be serious. So flexing to the situation. I talked about pace, we can speak faster and really, get some energy in there. But also, if we really have a strong point to make, let's take some pauses and make sure that people have time to process. And then finally, linked very closely to pace, your energy. So it's important to care about what you're talking about and, show passion for your topic. And interestingly, there is a difference between emotion and passion, especially when it comes to stereotypes. We've all heard or seen that stereotype where, a woman feels very strongly about something and speaks passionately, and that they're labeled a little bit emotional. So, to show passion, choose your words more than your tone to come across as caring, enthused, feeling strongly rather than emotional. Making our language more impactful is really important. And, it seems like such simple things to focus on. But leaders who speak with impact, they know how to grab attention and they know how to keep attention. I already said about, I really encourage people not to use, should, and I must, and I need to. They're quite harsh words to use to ourselves. But I think when we're speaking out, so our language going outwards, it's really good to have power in our language. So instead of mildly, suggesting, oh, what about this? We can say, well, I strongly suggest that we do this. And being strong in our agreement. So rather than, oh, yes, I tend to agree, say, absolutely agree with you. That's right. Here's why I think this. Also, instead of tentatively suggesting things like, maybe we could be very strong. Here's my plan. I feel strongly we should do this. And also, instead of kind of seeking permission, so what if we did this? Agree that the path forward should be this. I years ago worked in kind of more of a sales environment, and one of my colleagues used to send out emails. They were cold calling effectively through emails, and they used to say things like, "Oh, I'm really sorry to disturb you," and got very little back. And actually, when they were much stronger in what they were doing, so I want to share this amazing thing that we've seen happen. People responded so much more positively. So then reveal. So really, it's about what we show about ourselves, both consciously and unconsciously, either physically or through our actions. So when it's done well, people really will perceive us as confident and leader-like. So consider things like the physical. So your posture, stand tall, use appropriate gestures to create connection, emphasize points, facial expressions, be genuine and congruent, that your face matches what you're saying. And then our appearance. So dress and grooming should be appropriate and professional for the level and for the organizational culture. And it's good to look at this and actually just do a little audit, a little self-check of the people around you. There's a story about, a fish doesn't know it's swimming in water. So, we can become very sucked into the culture of our organization. So every so often it's good to just step back and check if, how we're acting, how we're coming across, how we're presenting ourselves is right, both for the organization and for the level that we're operating at. With the physical, something that's come up before is, physically, and again, I don't like stereotyping, but physically, some women can be, smaller in stature than men. I'm short. I don't think of myself as short. When I see a picture or when I'm standing with a group of people, I go, wow, I'm actually quite short. So I think, don't let our physicality hold us back, because there's so much more power in everything else that we are showing up as. So another thing to consider is our body language and our non-verbal communication. And again, I appreciate these may seem like the basics, but a few small changes in your use of techniques can really impact how others perceive your confidence and your presence. So facial expression, don't let your face betray you. So sometimes our resting face when we're listening or concentrating can be really confusing, and we can send some unintended signals when we're actually just thinking and processing. or, you know, we can react in a way that's quite obvious to other people when someone says something that we don't agree with. I know that I have a very readable face. So I think in interactions when, you know, potentially I'm disagreeing with something, I have to be very mindful of how I'm coming across. It's important, you know, to keep a neutral face, you know, smile if it's appropriate, because that can be warmth and encouragement. And also being serious sometimes really does help with gravitas. So gestures. So again, this is a basic, but the use of deliberate gestures can have a big impact. So being really clear, if you look at, watch TED Talks of really powerful speakers, and you'll see that they make their points very assertively using their hands. If we tip over and use it too much, it can become distracting. So it's good to consider what's the midway point for you. Practice sometimes having your hands just naturally by your sides if you're not using very deliberate gestures, just to feel comfortable. I know, you know, we've lived in a few years of Zoom and virtual interaction where we don't always see our hands. And then sometimes when we're in face-to-face, we're wondering what to do with our hands, you know. Sometimes, I mean, a lot of times just putting them in our pockets is not appropriate. So, you know, do what feels comfortable and be comfortable in just resting your hands by your side, by the table, etc. Again, eye contact is important. And I'll, you know, a note of caution, just sense check what's culturally appropriate for eye contact, similar to touch. So I would say use it deliberately and as appropriate in the culture. So strong handshakes, a good example. Playing with our hair too much can distract from perceived confidence. Don't have any chat or thoughts on that. So we encourage people to share their personal brand statement and to really focus on their presence and impact when they're delivering that. I'm not sure that this is comfortable enough. If anyone wants to share their personal brand statement, feel free. But on the program, you know, we have built a very safe and connected space, and we can use that space to really try out new things. So share our personal brand and share it in a way that, you know, we really believe it and we feel very strongly and it is true to us. So we spend a lot of time practicing that. This in the program then brings us to lunch. And after lunch, we have a walk and talk with a buddy. So this is something different. We're all spending way too much time on screens nowadays. So we get people just to phone their buddy and they walk and talk with their buddy and share, you know, the areas that they want to put a bit more focus or be a bit more purposeful on. So these are all in your worksheet when you get a chance to look at it. So we then have lunch, as I said, and after lunch, we aim to have a speaker on each workshop. So, I mean, women and not just women, we all like to learn through hearing other stories and experiences. And it's good to hear what has worked for some people and what has worked, not worked for others. I mean, I've gotten some amazing tips from some of our speakers, just from managing boundaries, managing their time. You know, what works for me may not work for you. So it's really, really inspiring to have these speakers who are successful women and share what has worked for them. So speaker is usually 45 minutes and then we have a break. So Sarah, I'm going to pass back to you.
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen now. Sorry, just one moment, and it'll come up for me. Whistle stopped toward her. Sorry, one moment. Sorry, just doing a first stop toward here.
That's okay. That's okay. I mean, while you line that up, Sarah, I will share another TED Talk that I recommend to.
Right.
Say again.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thank you.
Yeah. So a TED Talk that I recommend to people is Amy Cuddy. So The Power of Body Language. And she does, you may know this TED Talk, she does talk about, power pose, if we really need to be powerful going into an interaction. But for me, the biggest takeaway from the Amy Cuddy TED Talk is she talks about faking it till you believe it. And I think for all of us, we have to convince ourselves before we have to convince anyone else of something. So again, encourage you all to listen to that TED Talk, Power of Body Language. It's Amy Cuddy, Cuddy, and listen to it, because I think in practicing all of this, our impact, our brand, we have to convince ourselves that it works, and then other people will follow. So recommend it when you get a chance, some lunchtime or evening, The Power of Body Language by Amy Cuddy.
Great tip. Thanks very much for that, Pauline. Fantastic. So the next part of the session, we talk about self-advocacy. So self-advocacy is, how do you think about self-promotion? So I'd like to ask you to put into the chat, if you may, if you think self-promotion is okay, and put A into the chat. And if you think it's a little bit awkward, you're not so comfortable with it, put B into the chat, please. And just as you're doing that, I'm just going to say, why do we think women shy away from this? And if you have any thoughts in relation to that, please pop that into the chat as well. So Pauline did actually cover a little bit of this previously, but just to reiterate it, that voicing successes and accomplishments can feel like bragging, and girls can be socialized not to do that. Women are challenged with self-advocating for themselves, for development, promotions, or negotiating salary. Sometimes we can actually find this quite difficult. Women often believe that good performance should be rewarded on its own merit. And we often believe as well that our good work will be noticed and rewarded. And we often underplay the importance as well of influence, of networks, of asking for opportunities. We tend to chalk up our successes to luck or even good timing, opposed to all of the talent and expertise that we have. And are women expected to be modest, maybe, than men, and not self-advocate? I think traditionally this is the case. I think that nowadays, as Pauline had mentioned, it can be a bit different. Women often feel uncomfortable, uninterested, and unmotivated in tasks that require self-advocacy, and perhaps don't perform as well as a result. So if you do feel awkward, try reframing how you are thinking about it. For me, I feel most comfortable really sharing success if it's sharing learning. So if I'm teaching someone how to do something, if I have to do something they don't, if I'm sharing learning with them and talking about my successes and sharing knowledge with them, I feel good about that. Don't use the word self-promotion, bragging, or boasting, even silently in your head. And think about making your work visible or known to others instead. So work does not speak for itself. We must share our work so others know about it. And I think as women, often we think, oh, if we work really hard, if people will see what work we do. And you know that doesn't happen. We really do need to share our successes with people. It's so important. And don't think about it as arrogance. And I'm sure you're so proud about the accomplishments you've had. So frame it as sharing how much value you've added to the organization and your customers and your teams. And rather than thinking you're bothering someone by focusing on yourself, focus instead of being of greater service and be excited about having more impact. And rather than thinking this is all about you, turn self-advocacy into other advocacy whenever possible. So ask others to advocate for you in situations where it's appropriate, and be an advocate for others, especially women. And we try and do that as much as we can within sessions as well. So reflect on whether you're aware of doing any of these things. And these are things that reduces our impact. And Pauline had mentioned this, and it's really the way we frame our words. And sometimes we can minimize our contributions, the way we say things. So So do any of these things resonate with you? Saying successes are because of good luck or timing versus really taking ownership for the hard work you've done and your experience and the great skills that you've applied. And when others recognize or praise you, do you just brush it off as positive feedback? And maybe even over apologizing when it's not your responsibility or no real reason to do so, or starting emails or sentences with phrases like "I'm sorry, but," and hedging "I might be wrong, but," or "I don't know, but." So I'm going to run a poll, and Anastasia, if you could please start the poll. And the question is, do I make my strengths or successes smaller? So Anastasia, if you could please run this poll, and if you could just tick what applies to you.
That the poll is up. Can everyone see it?
Yeah, I can. Yeah, looks.
Okay, I can't actually see the poll.
Great.
So
we're
maybe
getting some
Pauline, if you
responses
could.
in.
Yeah,
Perfect.
absolutely. So
Great, thanks.
we have we're nearly there. So we have a good split. I think we're it's really interesting. So quite a good split. So right now, 67% brush off positive feedback, 50% over apologize, 50% start emails or sentences like "sorry," hedging "I might be wrong," 60%, like using qualifiers, 60%, and 10% say none of these, which is
It's so common.
yeah. Awesome. I'm going to share the result so you guys can see it is common, and I think, and you're covering this area, it's about being aware of it. So we do it, we've grown up doing it, and realizing actually it's not serving us anymore is important. I will stop sharing.
Self-awareness. Yeah, self-awareness is just so important, because it's not something that we ever think about. We just do automatically, and sometimes we have to just stop and think a little. And if you've any thoughts on that, please feel free to put them into the chat. We'd love to hear them. Any other comments or anything else to mention in relation to that? So if you think about people that would benefit from knowing more about your achievements and aspirations, so it could be your boss, it could be someone further up, it could be someone outside of the organization, could be somebody on another team. So think about how visible are your accomplishments in the organization, and what you want to make aware of your good work, and who do you want to see your good work, and who are the decision makers impacting your career, and who are the leaders you'd like to work with more or to be tapped by for future roles or special projects. So is there anything currently in place that would make those leaders aware of your good work? So think about how you can be ready to share in an impactful way. So when someone next says "great job" or "great job, Pauline," and instead of saying "oh yeah, thanks very much, that's great," let's say you've worked on a really tricky project, a really challenging project, you nearly lost a customer and you've brought them back in. You could say something like, "yes, I'm really pleased with how I dealt with that demanding client. That project, it was a risk, but I enjoyed getting the client back on board. So we could get the work delivered to a really high standard." So if you've any more big projects that like that, I'd love to do more of that. So it's really just about, letting people know everything that you actually did to be successful. That took an awful lot of work, and everything that you did. So find your own way to do this. But here are some examples. So sharing what you're pleased with is really important. Sharing what you did, sharing any results, and then ask or a reinforcing message, letting people know at the end that you'd like to do more of that work. That was a really exciting project. You're really up for the challenge. And we get everyone to practice this. And we've put this also on your worksheet for you to think about too. So at this stage of the program, what we do is we put people into their buddies, and we have and our buddies have conversations to review actions and next steps. And then at the end of the session, so we're now at the end of today's session, And at the end of this workshop, we ask you to complete an evaluation. So Anastasia, if you could just put up the little evaluation poll, please. And while you're filling that out, I'll just remind you of what's coming up next week. So next week, we talk about adding strategic value. So with this, we're looking at common barriers to being strategic, adding strategic value and communicating strategically. I'm going to be joined by Orla Power, who was on our first workshop, who designed the Women in Leadership Programme. And I'll also be joined by Sinead Laverty as well, who's a communications expert, and she's going to be joining us. So I'd recommend until now, between now and then, please keep up buddy conversations if you have a buddy. Please keep up the conversations to review actions and thinking from these sessions. So we really hope that this has given you a flavour of how we deliver our programmes, as well as started you thinking. And if you have any queries, please email us at ewill@lhh.com. And just to say as well, that some of you have asked about our open programs. So we will be running a program in September. So if you're interested in joining us, please do get in touch. And that's the end of our session for today. If you do have any questions, please do put them into the Q&A, as Pauline and I are going to hang on for another 5 or 10 minutes, and we'd be very happy to answer your questions. If you're leaving us now, thank you so much for joining us. And we look forward to seeing you next week, same time next week.